Hey folks, Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and we have a One D&D survey results and the future of One D&D video that recently dropped from Wizards of the Coast over on YouTube. I'm going to listen to it. We're probably going to put it on double speed. It is a 37-minute video, so we'll probably put it on double speed, see what comes out of it, and kind of comment as we go and see what happens. I have not watched this first. You are getting a first response here from me. So first thing I'm going to do is go to our playback settings and put the speed at double because it takes a long time. So here we go.
Talking about how 1D&D is going, how the playtest is being received. We've got some scores, right? We know things now about how this process is going, correct?
Absolutely. So we have now had a chance to analyze the feedback to the very first Unearthed Arcana in this series, the Unearthed Arcana that was called Character Origins. We have compiled the satisfaction scores, our staff has also combed through the written responses, and so we now have a very clear idea of how the D&D community responded to that first stage of this playtest process. And so I'm super excited to share some of what we learned.
Yeah, what have you learned?
So first off, the level of engagement was through the roof. Over 40,000 people engaged with the survey, about 39,000 completed the whole thing. And so first, I want to say thank you to everybody who
40,000 survey completions. That's a lot of people, which is pretty, I mean, and that took a while to get through, right?
filled out that survey. I know it can take some time to do it. It's invaluable for us. We not only look at all the scores, we dig into what people have written. This really helps us get a sense of where does the community want D&D to go next. So again, big thanks to everyone who participated. And there was a ton of people who participated, which means the satisfaction scores that we have are quite persuasive, given how many people participated.
Good.
So first, how about I tell you the thing that scored the highest
Yeah, I'm very curious.
in the whole UA. So the thing that scored the highest, almost reaching 90% satisfaction, was getting a first level feat in your background.
I mean, we've been saying that for years, right? Everybody, I know I've done videos on it from years and years ago. I know a lot of people do this in their own homebrew games. I do it too. Makes perfect sense to me. And everybody wanted more feats. So there you go.
This is a great example of a kind of experimental thing that we will sometimes put out there. Way back for the D&D Next playtest, an example of an experimental thing where we truly weren't sure how the audience was going to respond was the advantage and disadvantage mechanic, which are now a core part of the game because fan satisfaction was so high. I frankly expected fans to be satisfied with getting a first level feat in their background. What I did not expect is that the satisfaction would be this high.
I mean, who doesn't like free things? So.
Well, again, it was an open question because some groups prefer not to use feats, which is one of the reasons why we're very carefully threading this needle of, all right, you get this free one, so we're not going to require you to
I don't know almost any groups that play without feats. If you do you enjoy it? Is there a reason why? I'd love to hear. Let me know in the comments.
engage with the feat system repeatedly unless you really want to, but we also want to give you that taste so that you can then make an informed decision about whether or not you later engage with feats. Feats also, as you and I chatted before about, are a great way for us to communicate some concrete things that each background is good at. So I'm excited to see how much the community is embracing getting a feat as a part of a character's background. Here's the thing. That scored super high.
Right.
What was amazing is almost everything did. So the majority of the things in this Unearthed Arcana scored 80% or higher.
Except for critical hits. Well, but I'm sure that's coming.
So before I go any further about the scores of specific things, I think it's important to talk about what do the numbers themselves mean.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this at length. So usually 70% or higher, right?
Yep, 70% or higher is what we're looking for. When something scores in the 70s, we see that as the community giving a thumbs up, but that also means there's still some tinkering for us to do. Sometimes very minor tinkering or moderate tinkering. But the core message is the community is saying, yes, more of this. As soon as a score hits 80% or higher, now we're going into the realm of not only does the community want more of that, but they want exactly that. So what that means for us as a design team is when we look at a thing that gets 80% satisfaction or higher, we then tread very carefully in our further development to make sure we don't change it too much. It might still be changed in minor ways for balance reasons, for cohesion reasons, making sure the different parts of the game are functioning well together. But as soon as you're into that 80% area, or even more especially if you make it into the 90s, that is basically the community saying, yes, this.
This is remarkably interesting, and I am very excited that we're getting this. This is actual insight into the design process. This level of transparency of any kind from Wizards of the Coast on the Dungeons and Dragons side is greatly appreciated. Regardless of how you feel about how they handle this, the fact that they're giving us this insight and letting us know what they choose to do and what they don't choose to do, I think is really eye-opening. And it also is very interesting, and it embraces things that all of us in content creation know. You can't please everyone. You never will, right? It's just impossible. Somebody somewhere is going to hate what you do. It's just how it goes. So I like to see that basically 70% satisfaction on a given thing is what they say, okay, this is worth us devoting time and development on to continue forward with. So I guess in theory, I don't know if that's just One D&D or how they've done things in the past, but if you liked an Unearthed Arcana subclass or something in the past that never went anywhere, or didn't become something in the future, perhaps it didn't reach that 70% mark, so they just left it in the dust and it got, shelved. Whereas some things that did like 80 or above pretty much arrived in their final form in what we saw. And I guess the best example we have of more recent information is the Lunar Sorcery Sorcerer. It more or less, with very minor tweaks, arrived in the final Dragonlance printed book almost exactly as it was in its Unearthed Arcana form. So I have to say, I'm gonna assume that that was probably in the 90s on the overall scale there. All right, let's keep going.
Now, when we go below 70, when we're in the 60s, something in the 60s we consider to be salvageable. That there are enough people interested in the thing that maybe there's something there for us to save, but we need to really reconsider many aspects of the design. Anything that scores below 60%, like when we're in the 50s,
Failing.
good chance we're not going to do anything with it. And if it's in the 40s and below, it's pretty much gone. It got dusted. The community has disintegrated on it, and the dust is there. Now,
Never to be spoken of again.
now, I have to say, it is extremely rare for anything to be in that category.
Critical
Most
hits.
things that we send out in Unearthed Arcana end up in the sort of 60, 70, and 80 range. It's really rare for something to hit into the 50s, and even rarer for something to be lower than that. But again, what was remarkable when we got the scores back for this UA is how many things were 80% or higher. And again, the first level feat was at 87%. So again, inching toward 90% satisfaction,
This is
which
very
is
good.
a ringing endorsement for that piece of design. Would you like to hear about some other scores?
I would love to. I'm curious what's low? What was low?
Yeah, that's a great question and easy to address because so little was low. So first off, nothing was in the 50s or below. We had among the various main options, there were only 3 things that dipped into the 60s. So one of those was the D20 test rule that was in the rules glossary. Was not a surprise to us. You and I talked when we introduced that, highly experimental. I didn't actually expect what we were doing there with the, a 1 for all D20 tests being a failure, a 20 for all D20 tests being a success, the way critical hits were working. You and I talked about it. Highly experimental, which often in our conversations in these videos, when I say that, that means I won't be surprised if it doesn't make it. But the thing is we often like to do what's called A/B testing. We like to present 2 very different versions of something and then compare the community's response to them, which is why in the very next Unearthed Arcana, before we even delved into the feedback for the first one, we presented a different version of the D20 test rule. And I am expecting, once the survey closes for the expert classes UA, that we'll see a very different score for the D20 test. So again, the D20 test rule being in the 60s, not a surprise.
Was there anything that was a surprise?
No. Other than, okay, there is one surprise here so only again, 3 things that were in the 60s. The surprise is about the next 2, about their relative relationships to each other in the 60s. So the other 2 things that were in the 60% range were the Ardling and the Dragonborn. And the big surprise here is the Dragonborn scored lower than the Ardling.
Not
so
surprised
I was ready
at
for
all.
the Ardling, which was totally new. Really, it was just, ta-da, here's a brand new option. Anytime we do that, we are prepared for response to be all over the map. So it's really
How could you think that the Dragonborn wouldn't come off so low when you did so much efforts to kind of improve the Dragonborns overall in Fizzbands? I understand it's just we're in this weird design space, and I think that's probably why. Because you have things like, you're looking at it and it's like, okay, we have this situation where we're not going to address anything that's not in the player's handbook. And I think that was probably the issue, right? Because we're ignoring things that are outside of the player's handbook. So we had to take the Dragonborn from the player's handbook. But it's weird because we already adjusted the Dragonborn in Fizzbands, but then we have to basically ignore that. Ardling is a little surprising. It was just new, so I didn't think it would do poorly. And I'm actually surprised the D20 test rules with the automatic success, auto failure, and the monsters can't crit. I'm actually more surprised that that was in the 60s and not significantly lower. But, I mean, it is what it is. You got to take it all with a grain of salt. Sorry, I can notice in the process of doing this that my power just randomly went out. So I have to adjust my camera settings because it keeps, even though my face cam from Elgato is supposed to save my settings, it decides to just adjust those automatically for me, which is fun. Well, there we go. It's good. Yeah, a little better. Okay, back to the video.
hard to surprise us with, whether it's super approving or super disapproving, totally new things, always a big question mark over them. And so we're prepared for essentially any response. What surprised us was that the Dragonborn, which is well established in the game, scored lower than the Ardling. And they were both in the 60s, so that means they're both salvageable, but we then need to dig into what needs to happen next. And people are going to get to see what's going to happen next in our next Unearthed Arcana, which will include new versions of both the Ardling and the Dragonborn.
Oh, okay.
Now, I can tell you now, and maybe in our video for that UA we can dig a little deeper, I can tell you now that as we dug into the written responses about the Ardling and the Dragonborn, I can sum up pretty easily why we think both of those options landed in the 60s.
Good.
For the Dragonborn, it's really simple. It's the breath weapon. There was dissatisfaction about the implementation of the breath weapon, so we are addressing that head on in the next version.
Good.
There was also some confusion in the feedback about the relationship of this new version of the Dragonborn to the Dragonborn options that appear in Fizban's Treasury.
There it is. Okay.
And so this is a great time for me to clarify
Perfect.
that whatever new version of something we present in the 2024 Player's Handbook can stand alongside options like those that appear in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. You can really think of the Player's Handbook Dragonborn as sort of being the universal Dragonborn, whereas the Dragonborn options in Fizban's are very intentionally more targeted, specifically a metallic Dragonborn, a chromatic Dragonborn, a gem Dragonborn. Those options can be played alongside the more universal Dragonborn that would appear in the core book. So again, people are going to get to see a whole new take on.
We are 100% confirming 2024 Player's Handbook. Like, not that I didn't think that was going to be what it is, but that's official confirmation that that's coming.
The Dragonborn in the next UA, including also a new, fun 5th level ability that kicks in for that universal Dragonborn. So we can talk about that in our next
okay.
video.
All right.
I am a dungeon master at heart, and part of being a DM is cliffhangers. So next time, we'll
that's
talk about
exciting.
that.
Good stuff.
The Ardling, here also, once we dug into the written feedback, it was pretty clear what was going on, and I really loved the feedback we got. And that was that the Ardling was trying to do a few too many things. It was sort of both being a sort of a cousin to the Aasimar, which, by the way, we saw some questions of, is the Ardling replacing the Aasimar? Definitely not. The Aasimar is still in the game. The Aasimar is in Monsters of the Multiverse. But again, there was a sense that it was sort of being a cousin to the Aasimar while also being a beast person. And we saw much more interest in the feedback in the Ardling of leaning into the beast person side. And so in the whole new take of the Ardling in the next Underdark Arcana, people are going to see that. It's
Okay, no more. Sounds like it won't be tied.
The place it's filling in the multiverse,
The
I think it's definitely
Celestials.
going to come into focus for people.
Great.
It's cool.
That's right, you have read it. So that's it. It was just those three things. Everything else was scored in the 70s or the 80s. And
It's also an amazing amount of playtesters.
yes, the number of playtesters, again, 39,000 people completing the survey is remarkable. And that's why I said that means these scores are persuasive. And I'll give a few more that I think will be fascinating to people.
Okay, yeah.
So as long as I've been working on the game, over multiple editions, the human is the most played. Now, the one bit that was very satisfying to me here that was a bit of a surprise was just how much people like this new take on the human.
Love it.
And so yeah, the new human
100%.
3%.
Wow.
Followed by 4 options that basically were virtually tied. The dwarf, the orc, the tiefling, and the elf all were basically virtually tied, hovering around 80 and 81%.
I like Tremor Sense.
Yeah, and then
Also interesting that the halfling didn't make it in that list, because I do feel like that's one of the ones that got kind of a nerf in the grand scheme.
the other 2 options, I mean, we've now talked about all of them except for the gnome and the halfling, and even the gnome and the halfling scored really well, tied at 78%. So a lot of excitement and positivity about these options, but also some great notes in the written feedback that we are analyzing and will incorporate into future versions.
This is what we want, right? Again, it's a video from the source, so take it with a grain of salt. But I believe that what Jeremy is saying in this video is truthful. They are looking at the written feedback. It seems that they are taking our feedback into consideration and are really, truly trying to use that to shape the future of the game. Now, ultimately, they have final say in everything, and we can bitch and moan all we want. It may not go anywhere, but it does sound like they're at least doing their best to do so, and that's exciting to me, and I think it should be exciting to you as well.
Of these options. And again, people are going to get to see a new Ardling and a new Dragonborn in our very next UA.
So what are we seeing for future installments of UA right now, for One D&D playtest?
So in our next one, we have not only the new Ardling and the new Dragonborn, as well as a surprise guest, which we'll talk about also in our next video.
Okay,
but also
awesome.
we have a new version of the Cleric.
And we're going to priests! Whoa, we thought we were doing warriors. We're going to a new cleric. Okay.
This UA will be a little shorter than our others. We've realized that the first 2 were really chunky. And so this one is still big, but a little smaller. Then the next one after that's going to get bigger again. And we will continue our journey through the classes. So, of course, we have still to go the Druid and the Paladin to accompany the Cleric in the...
Oh, we're not doing all 3. We're just doing the cleric. That kind of worries me a little bit, but we'll see.
Priest group, and then we have the warrior group and also the mage group ahead of us. One of the things I am super excited about when we get to the warrior group UA is that's when we're going to dig deep into something I teased in the previous UA. In the previous UA, there's a sidebar that talks about what's ahead for the One D&D playtest. And one of the options that I saw online, some people didn't notice, is new weapon options for certain types of characters. Here's what that means. We are going to be unveiling, with the new versions of the warrior groups, whole new ways to use weapons.
This is it, folks. This is what we wanted for warriors. It looks like we're going to be getting... I'm going to let him finish, but I think maneuvers or something similar that they will have access to that makes them have, like, spells, as it were, with weapons that makes it different.
Some of those things we're going to dive into is going to become your home base.
Yeah, in the most recent UA, in that little preview of what's ahead, one of the things mentioned is there'll be new rules on managing your character's home base. This is going to be a new subsystem that DMs and players can decide to, whether they're going to implement it in their campaign or not. And if they do decide to, they're going to be able to create home bases with NPCs connected with them that end up implementing a number of our current downtime rules in the context of your home base and your group of NPCs, and that system we call the Bastion system. And next year we're going to unveil what you're going to be able to do with that should your campaign adopt it.
I'm very excited for this.
I am too. We've had tons of fun planning it out. But before we get there, we're focusing on the core character options of the game, especially character classes, which means we also have, in the end, there will be a total of 48 subclasses that will appear in this playtest process, 4 for each of the game's 12 classes. We also are going to share with DMs new encounter building rules aimed at making it easier to prep. And
Great.
even more monster customization options, things that will make it easier
fantastic.
for DMs
Sounds like templates might be making a comeback.
to run this game. And so there's a whole lot ahead of us.
Potentially.
Also mixed in will be new versions of things that appear in the playtest, because a critical part of this is we send things out, we get feedback. Things that didn't score particularly well, we do new versions, we send those out, we get feedback on that. It's a process that is already bearing fruit. The feedback that people have given is already improving what's going on here, both at the macro level with things like the Dragonborn and the Ardling, but also on the micro level, because since we dig into the written feedback that is provided, people are already telling us great things about wording in the rules glossary, for instance, that might be unclear to them. And so that's the playtest process working. We read it like, aha, we will improve this, meaning that when we get finally to the books in a couple of years, we will have been able to refine the wording of the rules, the character options, the DM options, incorporating feedback from tens of thousands of people.
This is
This
fantastic.
is very clear why it's so important for everyone to playtest it and then give that feedback, because it's clearly changing the process as we go.
Absolutely. And it's even valuable to us if, say, a person doesn't have time to playtest, it's still valuable for us to get feedback on the survey just based on the person's reading of the material. Because we can tell when we're reading if feedback is based on real play experience versus first impression on reading. Feedback from both situations is helpful to us. And so I encourage people, if you've at least read it, please fill out the survey.
Okay, that's what I've been saying the whole time, and that's awesome to hear. Even, like, not all of us have the opportunity to playtest, and we don't always necessarily have the opportunity to playtest in the playtest window for the survey. So it's good to see that they are taking into consideration when people give feedback, even if it's just based on a reading. But they also have that option. Have you playtested this, yes or no? If you check no, they know that.
Even better if you've read it and you've tried some of it out in play, because we find all of our perceptions change once we get to the game table and we're rolling dice. But again, all of the feedback is helpful.
This is something that's come up a bit with the playtest material. If there's something absent, like the use object action or like Eldritch Blast, does that mean that that's not going to exist?
So that is a great question. And what I think is important to understand about the playtest is we're presenting a version of something and asking what people think of it with the assumption that if something doesn't appear in the playtest, it's still in the game. So people have rightly noticed that the Eldritch Blast spell has not appeared on any of the spell lists thus far. Eldritch Blast has not been removed from the game. It just means it's not on those spell lists. And when we get to the Mage Unearthed Arcana, people will get to see what we're doing with Eldritch Blast in the Warlock.
Class feature.
Similarly, the use an object action, and actually several actions have not appeared yet in the glossary for the playtest. What that means is we're still using the action as it's defined in the 2014 Player's Handbook, because typically we put things in the glossary only if we've changed the definition in some way, or if it's something that was never fully defined in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Because there are a few rules that didn't appear in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but did appear in the Monster Manual or Dungeon Master's Guide, and essentially our test is if it didn't appear in the PH, and we want people to test it in the playtest, we put it into the glossary. Similarly, if we've changed it in some way, it goes into the glossary. And if it's not there,
Don't panic.
it is still in the game until we say it isn't.
Right.
Now, people have rightly noticed that the Thief subclass in the previous UA doesn't, as a part of their cunning action enhancement, interact with the use an object action anymore. That's intentional. That wasn't an accidental omission. We removed it from that feature because in the 2014 version of the feature, it fell into an area of mechanics that we sometimes refer to as Mother May I mechanics. And what we mean by that is something that is on your character sheet that really only works if
the DM allows it.
cooperates with you in its execution.
Right.
This is as opposed to most of the features that characters have where you can reliably just use.
To that point, I'm sure he's going to explain it, is the concept of, technically, I believe the official ruling is the use an object action doesn't allow you to activate a magic item that uses an action. Like, that's what a lot of people consider for the Thief Rogue. Like, if you have a magic item, you're like, well, I want to use this object, right? I want to cast Fireball with my wand of fireballs that takes an action, but because I can use the use an object action as a bonus action, I should cast it as a bonus action. And it doesn't actually work that way. You're casting a spell. So that's something that I think came up, and I'm assuming that's what they're referencing here, which is why, like, well, if you tell your DM, well, I can use an object as a bonus action, can I use my wand? And then the DM could say yes, and then you can, and the DM could say no, and then you can't.
Use it, and it does what it says on the description of the feature.
Right.
And we have found that in general, those sorts of mechanics that kind of require DM permission or buy-in to function properly often end up being unsatisfying, or they end up slowing down the game. And so, for instance, what the thief could actually do with that bonus action, use an object action, caused endless questions. Partly because we weren't clear enough in the 2014 rules everything about what all is encompassed by use an object, because we tell you, well, you can use an object with it, but not a magic item, and it's not entirely clear how the equipment in the equipment chapter interacts with that action. All of that is on our list to clear up in this playtest process.
Fantastic.
But specifically for the thief, we didn't want that to be a part of that feature anymore.
I'm fine with
an object action go away? It might. I'll be upfront about that. But we haven't decided yet, and that will be a decision we come to through the playtest process. And so again, if something is actually going to be removed from the game, we will say so. So again, if it's not present, it just means it's not in the playtest yet, or we're happy with its 2014 implementation.
The journalist in me wants to ask about wild magic sorcery now. Speaking of Mother, may I have a wild surge?
And you can expect when we get to the mage classes, and specifically to the sorcerer, we're going to address that. And you
Great.
also saw in the previous Unearthed comment that we addressed that in the ranger, because one of the main issues with especially the ranger's first level features in the 2014 Player's Handbook is they relied way too heavily on DM buy-in. That if your DM really bought into how they functioned, your ranger could feel at first level super effective, and later on feel like you had something to contribute that others didn't.
Right.
But if your DM didn't buy in, you could end up with a situation where you felt like those features didn't even exist in terms of actual
Favorite
play.
enemy,
And so
favorite
we've addressed
terrain.
that in the ranger. Luckily, that isn't an issue for most of the features in the game, but when we come across them, we want to make sure one of our design goals is if you've got a class feature, you should be able to use it in the way you expect. Now, that still leaves things open for the DM to introduce in the environment, in the cosmos, something strange that alters how things work. But that's a story thing, and that's totally within the DM's purview. That's different from the feature itself basically telling you, well, if the DM buys in, you'll get to use this.
Yeah. Another question that's really common is great weapon fighting and sharpshooter. So these feats have damage bonuses, many of which people enjoy, with a little bit more risk-reward kind of action in their mechanics. Why was that changed?
So, yeah, in the 2014 versions of those two feats, they had the damage bonus that you talked about. That was sort of counterbalanced with a penalty to your to-hit roll that you would adopt. Here's the issue. First off, the penalty to the to-hit roll, especially at higher levels, is not actually big enough to justify that large of a damage bonus. It becomes very easy as you progress to make that -5 to your attack roll trivial. But then there's an even bigger issue. We want our warrior classes in particular to be able to rely on their class features, which, remember, are going to include some of these awesome new weapon options. We want them to be able to rely on those for their main damage output. We do not want any feats to feel like you have to take them to be dealing a satisfying.
And people may not like this, but I 100% agree with what they're saying here. And I've had this actual conversation in person with my players and co-players at a table and said, yeah, it kind of does feel like a Great Weapon Master was something that you kind of needed to have. Not, you didn't need it, but it kind of felt like a thing you needed to have on a barbarian or something to just improve that damage. You didn't have something like a smite mechanic for a paladin where you could just bump up your damage and you're a martial character, right? So you kind of needed that. I mean, in a lesser extent, that's like you kind of need to take Eldritch Blast as a warlock because so many invocations are based off of it. So what do you do to make things a little more streamlined and not force people to make... I mean, that was also a thing we saw rampant in older editions. You want it to be effective at X class, X prestige class, you have to take this feat. You have to buy this magic item. And what they're trying to go for here is to allow you the freedom to make your own choices, and it doesn't critically impact your character in a negative way if you choose to break against that norm. Like I said, I know tons of people out there like, oh, I don't take Eldritch Blast on my Warlock. And yeah, that's cool, but you're doing that to just be different. You would be infinitely more effective and have access to so many more useful invocations if you did. Unless you change the mechanics of the invocations to say, like, don't apply them to just Eldritch Blast, apply them to all cantrips. And then that makes things a little bit different.
Amount of damage. So really the issue with those two feats was twofold. Again, it was too easy to make the penalty to the to-hit roll trivial, and those two feats with those really enticing damage bonuses in them almost became must-haves. And that for us violates our design goal for feats, which is we always want you to feel good about the feats you took, but we don't want you to feel like you must take particular feats to hit a baseline level of whether it's damage output, or if you're a healer, the amount of healing you do, or if you're an expert and you're much more about versatility. We want you to go to feats because there's a particular angle you want to accentuate, not because you feel like I've got to take this feat to be able to show up and do my job.
100%.
So fear not, people who love playing warriors, there is juicy stuff coming in the classes themselves, and that's where we want you to be able to turn reliably to some options where you will be dishing out the damage. And again, that's one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to when we release that UA.
So there's another one. There's the light weapon property and having to do with bonus actions. Are we going to see other changes like this, and why was this changed?
So the light weapon property, we really amped it up by removing the bonus action requirement. It's now, you get this extra attack simply as a part of the attack.
I love this a lot.
Is that because of the threading of everything going through a bonus action?
Yes, because, and I think we might have talked about this in our video about this UA, requiring light weapon users to use their bonus action to get that extra attack meant that there were a lot of bad combinations
Things
with
you
class
couldn't
features
do.
that also required bonus actions, spells that required bonus actions. It meant that people who really like the fantasy of fighting with two light weapons were sort of having to pay a tax that other weapon users were not having to pay. And so that's why we made that change, because
It sucks
we noticed
in
over
base
time
edition,
that
base
tax
5e.
on light weapon use was actually causing us to sort of distort design decisions elsewhere. Like we started flinching away from using the bonus action in a few cases, even though the bonus action was the most natural design choice, because then we're like, well, but then this will be rough for people who are using light weapons. So the playtest is a time for us where we can find how about we just fix the light weapon property so that it stops causing
It's such a
ripples in
clean
the design
fix.
environment, so that a light weapon user can use these other options just as well as somebody else. So when, again, we get to the warrior classes and we explore the new weapon options, we're also going to explore possibly tweaking some of the other weapon properties. But our focus is going to be more on these brand new options. Again, we'll talk more about that.
I'm very
Another
excited.
one of these things that came up was class spell lists. Are these going away forever?
That's an open question. So our focus right now is getting everyone used to the 3 big spell lists: the arcane list, the
I
Bard
like
list, and
it,
the divine list.
personally.
Now, in the expert classes UA, we saw the bard and the ranger interacting with those lists, but with some
Caveats.
some exceptions.
Yeah.
Right? Each of them could pick only certain spells from whatever list they were going to. And we've definitely seen the feedback that for those 2 classes, it would be nice if they still had a class list that basically summarized what they can pick from the master list. We're definitely open to doing that. But what we really wanted to do is focus initially on showing people sort of how they get their spells from the master list. And we will definitely, as we build the books, look at ways to make the spell selection process even easier. And there's a good chance that will mean like the bard will have just a list that simply compiles all the spells that the bard can choose from. Now, there are going to be other classes, though, where that won't be necessary. And people are going to see that in the cleric, because the cleric can simply choose from the entire divine spell list. You're going to see that also with the wizard, who can choose from the entire arcane list.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
it's going to be a class-by-class decision we make, and it will really come down to, is it too much of a headache to go through the list and then manually, as a player, exclude certain schools? And I could definitely see that being a pain, in which case we are likely to give that class its own list that, again, is really just a summary of what's available to them from the master list. But
makes
then,
sense.
if a class like the cleric or the wizard can choose from an entire list, there'll be no need for us to have a class-specific list for them. This, by the way, is a part of the philosophy we've had all along for 5th edition. And that is, we're always looking to do what is right for a particular class. So what works for the bard may not work for the wizard. What works for the cleric may not work for the druid.
Good.
And so we will, especially as we transition from this playtest and development process into building the actual books, look at making sort of user interface decisions that make the life of the players who play each class as friction-free as possible.
Awesome.
Has this been exciting for you? Because like 5th edition has was around so long, and we've got One D&D taking this building off of that. Like there must have been stuff like you start picking up on year over year. That you're like, oh, if only we could tweak it.
Well, it is super exciting for me because I love this game. I love the game we've all been playing together for the last 8 years. But there are also things that I know could be faster, have more options, be clearer, have fewer places where you feel forced to make certain decisions. And so we're now able to address all of that through this process, continuing the conversation that we started with the D&D community, back with the D&D Next playtest process. And yeah, I am jazzed that we are going to continue this conversation for more than a year ahead of us. And that I think is a great note to end on today, is just to invite everyone to buckle in. This is going to be a long conversation.
Yeah.
We're going to see different versions of things. If you spot something that's unclear, that's not resonating with you, please let us know in the survey, because we're reading your feedback. We're already making improvements based on it. That is the process working as intended. It's meant to be a back and forth that will result in new versions of the core books that all of us as a community can be excited about.
So we really appreciate the comments, and we appreciate any commentary on social media as well. But if you want your voice heard, the best way to do that is the survey.
Absolutely.
Filling out the
said that
survey
for a
is the most
while.
important part. We're not able to look at every single comment that has been made on this video or on social media. The best way is, if you really want to affect the future of D&D, download the playtest material and then fill out that survey.
Yes, because we have multiple members of our design team dedicated to going through survey responses. And so that is your direct conduit to our design team, is filling out those surveys.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
All right, folks. So, that is that. Unfortunately, I was hoping we would have got maybe like a little teaser of the date that we could expect the newest one, which now we know is going to include an updated version of the Dragonborn that gets a new fifth level feature, an updated version of the Ardling, which seems like it's going to be more of like your beastkin beast folk race, which I'm on board for that. Some secret new race that we didn't know was coming, and then an updated version of just the cleric itself, which is also very exciting to me. So I'm excited to see this. I was hoping this would have been. We were hoping relatively soon. This news makes it feel like it should be soon as well. The only thing what's interesting is there's nothing on WotC's social media right now about this. It is just, we are in Dragonlance mode. It is just Dragonlance. Everywhere you look, it's Dragonlance. That's all they're promoting for like multiple tweets a day, for example, all about Dragonlance. And like this thing just came out, and the most recent tweet was from 15 hours ago, explore the deep history of Dragonlance. So if you're not subscribed to the Wizards of the Coast YouTube channel, or better yet, this YouTube channel, you wouldn't know these things are out there, which is just bizarre to me. And I do want to thank everybody and the thousands of tweets and DMs and all the messages from everybody telling me, hey, by the way, did you see that this thing came out? Because, yeah, there's nothing out there. It's just wild to me. Uh, and it's, yeah, if you don't follow the YouTube page, you won't know. But that also, like I said, makes me think that we're going to get this soon. But it's like wild, wild west as far as marketing and promotions of these things go. We just don't know. Videos get dropped with little to no fanfare. And if you're not looking for it, you don't find it. So, like I said, I think I'm taking this entire video as a positive, right? They're listening to our feedback. We now have much more clear intention and knowledge behind the design process of what gets things accepted, what things seem salvageable, how things come and just make a clean pass all the way through. And then also what to expect in the future. We know that it seems like mages are coming last. It seems like we're going to get the cleric and some new races here. But it also means that in the process, as we go along, as more feedback is sifted through, those may appear. So, for example, I guess if like the ranger, people didn't like the ranger, like the ranger might appear in a future one alongside something else. Cleric first, followed by druid and paladin. Then it sounds like after that, we'll be getting the warriors, which are getting some sort of new weapon interaction, which I think we might see something similar to what we saw in the mechanics for marshals in Baldur's Gate 3, or possibly just removing the Battlemaster fighter entirely and taking those maneuvers and baking them into martial classes as a whole, something along those lines. And then finally, we'll round this out with the mages subclasses, at least if we were to take Jeremy's order that he listed things off in as the true order. I mean, you guys may think whatever obviously you're entitled to your opinion, but I feel like this is truly a positive video, and it makes me feel like they're taking my, there are still big questions with One D&D. Let me start there, right? We still don't know the status of the OGL. We know they're going to support it in some fashion. But what that ultimately means, we don't know. But what I'm seeing from this, and as far as the design and feedback and whatnot and how it's incorporated, I'm pretty excited about this, honestly. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. If we do manage to get playtest information today, tomorrow, hopefully it's not while we're at PAX. That would suck. But if not, I'm going to have to divert myself away from the convention and go make a video because that's what I do. So anyway, folks, thank you all so much for watching. By the way, if you entered one of my giveaways, I contacted all the winners last night. You'll get an email from nerdimmersion@gmail.com. So keep an eye out on your email. And then congratulations if you won. And if people don't respond by like middle of next week, I'll pick new winners. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.